This case takes place in the UK in the year 2024. On the evening of the 27th of July 2024, a quiet street in East London became the scene of a horrific crime. A group of teenagers had been captured on camera punching a hole through a boarded-up window and placing something inside. They laughed as they fled, making what they did even more sinister. The target was an elderly man. He was helpless and a victim of constant harassment by these local youths. He was someone who had already suffered repeated intimidation in his own home and was about to meet his end in the cruelest of ways. Robert Price was a 76-year-old widower living alone in Dagenham. He was known locally as quiet and reserved. Robert had experienced significant hardships throughout his later life. After losing his beloved wife, Robert lived an increasingly isolated existence, rarely venturing outside except when necessary. Robert was someone who preferred his own company and struggled in social settings. This discomfort in social situations, combined with his vulnerability as an elderly man living alone, Robert was an easy target for local youths. Over the years, Robert faced escalating harassment. His home was repeatedly subjected to vandalism. Kids would smash his windows in, batter his doors, and damage other parts of his property. Basically, whatever they could destroy, they would. And so Robert boarded up his windows, seeking protection from the constant threat outside. His friend, John Shoesmith, recounted how Robert's daily life became severely restricted. John stated that kids would disturb him whenever he tried to leave his house. It was relentless. Robert's family was also deeply aware of his heinous situation. They later described their anguish at imagining the terror he endured in his final moments. He deserved peace, one relative later said, reflecting on the years of torment he faced. In classic UK fashion, despite the numerous incidents, the authorities' interventions were limited. They let Robert down to a serious degree, and so he was trapped in a complete nightmare. The harassment continued unabated, peaking just days before that fateful day. On the days running up to the 27th of July 2024, a brick was thrown through one of the only remaining intact bits of glass. But who were the culprits, and what was their motive? Well, we now know. One of the perpetrators, the eldest of the bunch, was called Nathan Otito Dilchukwu. By the age of 17, Nathan had lived most of his life in the British care system, based in Romford. Nathan's time in care suggested family dysfunction or personal struggles significant enough to require intervention by the state. However, these measures did little to alter his trajectory. From a young age, he developed a problem with impulse control and aggression. He was known for having a history of behavioural issues and frequently came into conflict with the authorities. He has several past incidents involving minor criminal offences due to his antisocial behaviour. But this is only known through his recent appearances in court, and the specifics of these incidents remain confidential. That said, the pattern was extremely clear. His behaviour often escalated around peers, leading to increasingly risky activities. Fireworks became a dangerous fascination for Nathan and his little friends, who frequently documented their exploits on social media, laughing at the chaos they caused. Despite his awareness of right and wrong, Nathan's actions often lacked empathy. Friends described him as, quote, bold and daring, traits which his peers admired. On the day of the fatal incident, Nathan's despicable personality and his apparent lack of foresight led him to participate in a vile and dangerous attack. On the 27th of July 2024, Nathan met with a 16-year-old friend, and together they spent the day engaging in reckless behaviour, primarily involving fireworks and alcohol. Their activities were recorded, showing the youth setting off fireworks in public areas and demonstrating a disregard for the safety of others. Later, they were joined by another teenager, too young for their name to be made public. Before too long, their attention soon turned to Robert Price's home. Knowing that Robert was an easy target, they approached his property in the early evening. Initially, the other two were hesitant and momentarily retreated when Robert opened his front door unexpectedly. However, Nathan urged his friends on. His voice was captured on nearby cameras repeating, "Come with me." Their initial hesitation quickly dissolved into a determined plan. Nathan, along with his accomplices, decided to escalate their harassment. Surveillance audio chillingly captured their explicit intent, with Nathan heard encouraging his accomplices once more. They brazenly discussed their intentions, openly referring to setting the house ablaze. At approximately 5:40 p.m. on the 27th of July 2024, Nathan and one of his younger accomplices approached Robert's home once more. Their intentions were clear. Nathan lingered close by while the younger boy stepped forward and climbed onto a gas meter box fitted on the exterior wall. The teenager repeatedly punched and tore the plywood boards covering the living room window, trying to find an entry point for what was in his hand. Within seconds, he created a jagged hole large enough for their deadly plan. Nathan stood back watching. He was heard clearly egging his accomplice on, with his voice recorded by a nearby home security camera. "Do it. Go on," he said, and without hesitation, the younger attacker produced a powerful firework. It was a multi-shot pyrotechnic device capable of discharging rapid bursts of flaming projectiles and sparks. He then lit the fuse. The flame caught immediately, emitting a small hiss. He pushed this burning device through the jagged opening he had made and quickly withdrew his hand, retreating to stand beside Nathan. Seconds later, chaos erupted inside Robert's living room. The firework detonated violently, instantly propelling flaming sparks and incendiary chemicals across the enclosed space. Furniture ignited rapidly. Within seconds, flames grew up the upholstery and the curtains. Within moments, the entire room was ablaze, quickly filling with dense, choking smoke. The teenagers, upon witnessing the immediate and horrific aftermath, reacted not with panic or regret, but instead with gleeful laughter and excitement. Their voices echoed through the streets, and it was captured clearly on the audio. They were laughing cruelly and loudly. Meanwhile, inside the rapidly deteriorating home, Robert was instantly trapped in a living nightmare. The elderly widower, slow and frail, had limited means to escape a sudden catastrophe. The explosion had disorientated him. The immediate thick smoke clouded his vision and filled up his lungs. Robert stumbled blindly throughout the choking darkness towards his front door. A neighbour then witnessed the smoke pouring from Robert's property and rushed to help. The neighbour knocked urgently on the front door, yelling Robert's name repeatedly, desperately hoping for some kind of response. Through the haze and confusion, Robert managed briefly to communicate in his faint and weakening voice behind the door. The neighbour later described how Robert's words faded swiftly, dissolving into muffled gasps and choking sounds as the smoke overwhelmed his lungs. Frantically, the neighbour attempted to break down the locked door, but his repeated strikes were futile. Robert's door was a solid barrier, armoured up to protect him from harassers. The thing that was keeping him safe was now keeping him trapped. The fire intensified, the heat radiated outward. The whole street was covered with the glow from the house. The London Fire Brigade received multiple calls at precisely 5:47 p.m, approximately 7 minutes after the fireworks exploded inside. Firefighters were dispatched immediately, with units arriving at the scene within mere minutes, but by their arrival, the house was already engulfed. Using battering rams, the firefighters swiftly breached the locked front door. Inside the house, visibility was near zero. Thick black smoke enveloped the rooms completely. Navigating by touch and instinct, firefighters urgently searched for Robert. Within moments, a firefighter's gloved hand encountered Robert's unconscious body lying collapsed near the door. He was barely inches from escape. Robert was carried from the burning property and laid on the pavement outside. Paramedics soon arrived, and they took Robert to hospital. Despite frantic attempts at resuscitation, Robert showed no vital signs of life. He had inhaled excessive amounts of toxic smoke, and the burns he had sustained were severe and widespread. The paramedics officially pronounced him dead at the scene at 5:59 p.m. Back inside the house, firefighters were continuing to battle the flames, extinguishing the blaze fully within 30 minutes. The front room was utterly devastated. The forensic fire investigators' report later confirmed that the blaze had originated precisely where the firework entered through the breached window. All physical evidence matched perfectly with witness descriptions and the security footage that was later found, confirming that this was no accidental tragedy. This was a deliberate act of arson. The post-mortem examination of Robert's body provided conclusive medical evidence about his final agonizing moments. He died predominantly due to acute smoke inhalation, meaning of course that Robert suffered horrifically at the end. These details painted a grim, heartbreaking picture of Robert's final moments. Disorientated, terrified, struggling to breathe, and ultimately overwhelmed by an environment that became his death trap within seconds. Nathan and his friends fled rapidly, but their movements were extensively documented by CCTV cameras across Dagenham. Footage later reviewed by police showed the teenagers sprinting along nearby streets, their faces flushed with excitement rather than fear or regret. Less than an hour after leaving the crime scene, Nathan returned to his residential care facility in Romford, where his behaviour immediately aroused suspicion. Nathan was visibly worked up and made a spontaneous and cryptic confession to a care worker, stating that he was going to go down for 20 years. Alarmed by Nathan's words, the care worker pressed him further, but Nathan maintained his disjointed account filled with half-hearted attempts at minimizing his actions. Nathan repeatedly warned staff not to check the local news, and this just only aroused suspicion further. A day later, he asked a care worker if she had heard about the fire, before telling her, "If anyone asks, don't say that I was in Dagenham." When asked why, he said, "Maybe I started a fire with a firework." He went on to say that he was drunk with two of his friends, that he put a firework through a letterbox, and that the whole incident was incredibly funny. Subsequent investigations revealed that Nathan had boasted openly to his friends about putting a firework through someone's window. He would always laugh and described the event as funny. The others involved also confessed to their friends in the immediate aftermath, providing matching details of their actions. The investigation into the deadly fire began immediately and was spearheaded by the Metropolitan Police's Specialist Crime Command. Detectives quickly descended onto the scene, cordoning off the charred terraced house on Oval Road North. Forensic fire investigators meticulously combed through the debris to identify the exact origin and the cause of the blaze. Within hours, investigators received the vital surveillance footage from nearby properties. Detectives quickly identified Nathan from the footage and linked him to previous incidents documented by local authorities due to his behavioral issues. Simultaneously, police officers conducted extensive door-to-door inquiries. Neighbours provided crucial testimonies regarding Robert's history of harassment, painting a distressing picture of prolonged abuse. Residents expressed their frustration and sadness. Investigators further traced Nathan's movements immediately after the incident. Within 48 hours, detectives arrested Nathan at his residential facility. During his arrest, investigators seized the clothing matching the descriptions provided by eyewitnesses and the CCTV. They also obtained Nathan's mobile phone, which contained messages and social media posts relating directly to the incident, further cementing his involvement. Upon being questioned, Nathan initially attempted to minimize his role, again showing a real lack of empathy, downplaying the seriousness of an extremely vile crime. However, persistent interrogation led him to gradually acknowledge his participation, confirming key details that corroborated existing evidence. Nathan's confessions eventually provided detectives with enough information to identify and apprehend his younger accomplices. The younger boy who placed the firework through the window was only 16 years old at the time. He was arrested shortly thereafter at his family home in Dagenham. His arrest revealed similar incriminating evidence. Matching clothing, video footage on personal devices, and explicit messages exchanged with Nathan in the lead-up and aftermath of the crime. Forensic specialists analysed the firework fragments received from Robert's home, confirming them as consistent with the type identified in video evidence. They determined conclusively that the fireworks' incendiary power caused the rapid and catastrophic spread of the fire, which gave Robert little to no chance of survival. This level of forensic detail was critical in establishing the severity and lethal intent behind the act, although the teenagers would later argue that their intention was merely to frighten and not to kill. Throughout the investigation, authorities faced criticism from community members demanding answers. How could the repeated harassment of an elderly resident escalate unchecked and lead to lethal violence? Neighbours questioned why warnings and reports were seemingly ignored by the police. Meanwhile, investigators had gathered significant evidence. The evidence at this point was irrefutable, meticulously laying bare the teenagers' deliberate and callous actions. The detectives working on the case briefed prosecutors thoroughly, recommending charges of murder and arson with intent to endanger life. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence and concurred, so both Nathan and his accomplice were formally charged. There is a third boy in the video, but it seems that he wasn't charged for the crime. Their swift arrest and decisive charges brought a sense of relief to Robert's family. But would justice really be served? Legal proceedings swiftly commenced at London's Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey. Nathan, who was now 18, appeared alongside his younger co-defendant, who remained unnamed publicly due to his age. Both of them faced initial charges of murder and arson with intent to endanger life. Prosecutors emphasized the cruelty of the laughter captured on recordings, painting an undeniable picture of reckless malice. Despite the overwhelming evidence, both defendants pleaded not guilty to murder, asserting through their defense teams that the fatal outcome was neither intended nor fully foreseen. Following discussions between the prosecution and defense teams, the Crown Prosecution Service ultimately accepted pleas of guilty to the lesser charge of manslaughter. This decision was immensely controversial to all who heard it. But despite the mounting evidence, the prosecution wasn't certain that they could persuade a jury of their peers to unanimously accept intent to kill. At sentencing, both defendants stood solemnly before the judge, awaiting her words. The judge sternly stated the gravity of their actions, declaring Robert's death a planned attack. She specifically addressed Nathan, highlighting his significant culpability and dismissing any assertions of innocence or naivety. She described Nathan as having poor impulse control and a lack of appreciation for the impact he had on other people. It was, however, reported that the younger defendant was visibly remorseful and seemed to be deeply affected during the court proceedings. The judge stated that she recognized him as significantly influenced by Nathan's dominant personality, which somewhat mitigated his following sentence. Nathan, however, received no such mitigation. Throughout the trial, he exhibited little authentic remorse, instead presenting himself as misunderstood, misguided, and not culpable for his actions. After the evidence and arguments were presented, the judge sentenced Nathan to 6 years in prison. 6 years. This was a sentence criticized by many as being far too lenient, given the severity of the consequences. He is quite literally responsible for burning an old man alive, and he received less than a decade in jail. His younger accomplice received 2 years and 8 months in custody. As the sentences were announced, Nathan's reaction was muted, displaying neither shock nor overt regret. He was led from the courtroom quietly, avoiding eye contact with observers. Robert's family watched silently as their faces were marked by restrained grief and quiet dignity. They were aware that no legal outcome would fully address their loss. Community reaction to the sentencing was mixed. Some accepted the sentences, but many others voiced dissatisfaction, expressing a belief that the punishments failed to adequately reflect the profound and irreparable harm done. Nevertheless, authorities considered the conviction a success. In the immediate aftermath of Robert's death, flowers and heartfelt tributes lined the pavement outside his charred home. Neighbours expressed sorrow over failing to intervene effectively, haunted by memories of seeing Robert live in visible distress behind boarded windows. One local resident said, "We should have done more," Public outrage led to demands for increased oversight and accountability regarding antisocial behaviour. Robert's death became a focal point in broader discussions about youth crime, prompting local leaders to initiate campaigns aimed at better community reporting and proactive intervention strategies. Social services and youth care institutions also faced scrutiny, prompted by Nathan's troubling trajectory from minor delinquency to lethal violence while under state supervision. But ultimately, Robert Price's senseless death serves as a haunting cautionary tale. More needs to be done to prevent harassment like this, and you should always look out for your fellow neighbour, as you never know when you also might be in the firing line.